Hey everybody. I really wanted to share my spiritual awakening experience because I think it's important, and it's the whole entire reason why I even decided to get off my medications in the first place. So at the beginning of the year, I think March 22nd is the actual day. I was at home working, and typically I would just have music playing in the background while I'm working. It's always the same, work music. But this night, for some reason, I was just not in the mood to listen to music. And I know that there's a podcast app on my iPhone that I had never used before, not listened to any podcasts. But for whatever reason, this night, it just occurred to me, the podcast app. And so I was like, okay, maybe I'll listen to something interesting. I don't know. I was really into like kind of horror and spooky stuff, just for the entertainment of it. So originally, when I started looking through the podcast, I was like, looking for something about like aliens or something. Wasn't a believer in that at all, but I just thought it would be kind of entertaining to play while I was working. So I was looking through podcasts, and I ended up looking for like 30 minutes before I picked one, and I ended up on this podcast channel or whatever, called Afterlife TV with Bob Olson. And the podcasts, all the episodes were pretty spiritually based, which was at this point in time something that I would have typically recoiled from. I think that at this point I may have actually been the least spiritual that I had ever been in my life. I just didn't want to hear anything about it. Anybody that tried to talk to me about anything spiritual really made me feel angry, and I wanted to throw up on them. It just was like, I don't know, I was so far away from anything spiritual. Well, I ended up on this podcast, and for whatever reason, I just picked one and let it play. I don't know. So I picked it, let it play, and I started picking up my work and just not really paying attention to what was being talked about in the podcast, just letting it play in the background. I don't know, maybe like 15 minutes went by, and in this episode, he was talking about his soul and his journey basically with his soul, and past lives and in between lives, and why he's here as a soul, and what the purpose of being here is, and blah blah blah. Things that I've heard 100 times before, in one ear out the other, don't really care. But at this moment, I just dropped what I was doing and just sat, and I listened intensely. And I had this overwhelming feeling. It was like a knowing or a remembering. It was more like a remembering, because in that moment when I stopped and I was listening, something came over me, and I recognized something was triggered, and I knew what he was saying was true. It was the truth. And it's strange, like I said, because I had heard these concepts before and it meant nothing to me. But in this moment, I knew that what he was talking about was true for me. You know, I can only speak for myself. And it resonated so deeply. It was like something woke up inside of me, and I was like, oh my God, what he's saying is true. And I sat there, and I just sat there and I listened for the entire rest of the podcast episode. and my body was almost vibrating, but I was extremely calm and peaceful. And when it was over, I walked outside and I sat on my porch, and I just sat there. I don't know how long I sat there, and just like sat there in the deepest state of peace that I've ever felt. This deep feeling of love. And this word specifically, what really was off-putting to me, people talking about like, oh, love and blah blah blah. What's interesting is nothing made more sense to me in that moment when he was talking about that. It just was what it was. Like everything is love. I don't know. I don't really have the language to explain, but the rest of the night is a little bit of a blur, bizarrely enough. And I know I went inside and I didn't work anymore, and I went to bed. And the next day, I woke up and I didn't think about what had happened the night before, really. I was kind of in a rush, and at this time I was nannying this little girl just 2 days a week, just extra money, and she's 2.5. And this morning I woke up and I was rushing around trying to get there, and I got to her house and I made her breakfast real quick, and I sat, gave her breakfast, and I was sitting next to her and talking to her a little bit, and I made eye contact with her, and I was just looking in her eyes, and I saw her soul. I saw that spark, that I saw what she really is past the form of her physical manifestation. I don't know the words, and my eyes welled up with tears, and it just started streaming, and it's just so sappy, but it's what happened. And I just looked at her, and it really just, like, that morning after, like, really triggered the full-blown sort of remembering of what's really happening here on Earth or whatever. And so it was extremely intense, and it went against everything that I thought and believed and felt just the day before. The shift was extreme, to say the least, and I was very emotional that whole week. I isolated a lot because I didn't know I had no idea how to even put anything in words, and it's still really difficult to do. But I knew that if I tried to explain to the people in my life who've known me what had just happened, they'd be like, are you okay? Like, what happened? Like, did you, like, I don't know. I just knew that that I wasn't going to be I wasn't going to be understood, because I kept thinking, if it were me telling myself, a week before this had happened, what had happened to me, I would have been like, okay, sure. I mean, that's just the truth. I wouldn't have been able to hear it. Anyways, the next week, maybe even 2, was extremely intense. A lot of euphoric, just love, like, coming off of me. I spent a lot of time just sitting on the porch and watching people walk by and just feeling this intense love for them, and this intense connection. And I had a lot of crying spells, mostly positive, a little bit of, sometimes I would start to cry because I knew that a lot of the relationships that I had would probably cease to exist, especially in the way that they were before I had this awakening. I was in a relationship for many years at that point, and I almost immediately, actually, in the midst of the awakening, like right in the beginning, like it occurred to me that that was probably that was gonna fall away. Not because that person hadn't had an awakening. It wasn't that, or that I was better than them or anything. It was more, I just knew that what had happened to me was going to change me in such a profound way that I would never be the same again, and I would not ever be able to go back to sleep and continue in this illusion of I am Hallie in this physical form, which is what was shattered, basically. The ego was shattered. And so I would say then the first couple weeks was just beautiful. It was beautiful. But then what happened was I started to, I guess you could say, I started to become more grounded again. I wasn't so like elated in this like spiritual bliss or what have you. I really don't even have the right language or terminology to describe any of this. I'm trying my best, so hopefully you're following. But yeah, so it was almost, I came back down to earth. So what happened is I was left with the remembering. I knew what I knew, but I wasn't feeling it every second, and that was extremely painful process to go through. And it's been almost a year now, and I still struggle with that back and forth, sort of feeling totally a part of and then feeling disconnected, and that longing to feel connected again because I know what's real. And it's just this whole crazy thing, but it's just really, to me, interesting how it just happened like that. You know, it was like something, it was like I was ready, or something inside of me was ready to wake up. And it seems totally random, but as time goes on, I can really see the unfolding in the sequence of events before this sort of like abrupt wake up. Quite a few psychic experiences, just a lot of really bizarre things that don't make sense in the reality that I was living in before. So yeah, I hope that I didn't just ramble, and that I hope that some of this makes sense. I don't know. It's just it can be really difficult. I'll say that it can be really difficult to exist in a reality where it sometimes feels really lonely and hard to relate. It's hard to relate and have fun doing the same things that I used to. Really hard to just sort of be a part of like mundane sort of conversations with people about things that they just don't matter to me anymore, and I can't pretend that they do. I've tried and I just can't. So as much of a beautiful thing as it is, it's really difficult at times. But it was through this process, months later after I had this awakening, that I came to the decision and the understanding that I didn't need to be on any medication. So it really came, the motivation and the willingness really came from this spiritual awakening. And I just really wanted to share that. So